we have arrived!
Recep Tayyip Erdogan arrives in Ethiopia, welcomed by Abiy Ahmed in Addis Ababa. Recep Tayyip Erdogan officially arrived in Ethiopia on February 17, receiving a high-level diplomatic welcome from Abiy Ahmed in the capital, Addis Ababa. The reception underscores the deepening strategic partnership between Ankara and Addis Ababa at a time of shifting geopolitical dynamics in the Horn of Africa. The visit represents a significant milestone in Turkey-Ethiopia relations. Both leaders are expected to hold comprehensive talks covering trade expansion, industrial investment, infrastructure development, defense cooperation, and regional security coordination. Erdogan's presence signals Turkey's sustained push to strengthen its political and economic footprint across Africa, with Ethiopia positioned as a pivotal partner in the region. Defense and security cooperation are also anticipated to feature prominently. Turkey has broadened its defense engagement across Africa through military training programs, technical assistance, and institutional support. For Ethiopia, navigating complex internal and regional security challenges, such collaboration is viewed as a strategic component in strengthening national defense capabilities.
I mean, sure, it definitely is challenging Israel's regional influence, but it's also just challenging its safety and security. But I think it also just goes further than that. It really shows the boundaries of Turkey's hegemonic sort of expansion goals throughout the Horn of Africa. We have seen Turkish arms contractors selling weapons to all sorts of regimes across the Sahel region, including many of those who are experienced or who have experienced coups d'etats and are run by horrific warlords. That's one thing, but Turkey doesn't care because that's just a commercial sort of entity. And it's certainly the case in its sort of adventures inside of Sudan, where Turkey has been accused of selling weapons to both sides of the civil war. And it's rather unapologetic. They would just say that, you know, Turkey has an interest in basically commercial arms exports. Mm-hmm. But it's really troubling to see what I would suggest, you know, what's happening in Ethiopia as well as Somaliland, Somalia, and Ethiopia. What you're seeing there, I would argue, is Turkey's grooming efforts of, you know, countries in Africa, specifically near the Horn, which have large Muslim populations, where anti-Semitism historically has not really existed. And what Ankara is trying to do is essentially insert itself there and really groom these regimes for the long run, where they can sort of, you know, ratchet up to, you know, anti-Semitic sort of sentiments amongst large Muslim majority African populations. And this is very sort of, you know, purposeful on Ankara's part.
Now, when we talk about NATO, we think about the world's most powerful military alliance. Now, a similar idea is taking shape, but outside the Western world. Reports say Turkey is in talks to join a new defense grouping involving Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, one that's being nicknamed Islamic NATO. So what exactly is this emerging alliance, and why does Turkey want to be part of it, and why could it reverberate beyond the region? Well, the foundation of this emerging alliance lies in a strategic mutual defense agreement signed between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia in 2025. The pact focuses on closer military cooperation, stronger deterrence, and faster joint responses to security threats. At its core is a crucial clause. If one member country is attacked, the others will treat it as an attack on all. Well, this collective defense principle closely mirrors Article 5 of NATO. And if Turkey joins, the pact would move from a two-country agreement to a three-nation security bloc, with each country bringing something different to the table. Saudi Arabia adds financial strength. Pakistan brings its stated nuclear capability and missiles, while Turkey contributes a large military and a strong defense industry. Experts say this combination could significantly boost the group's military influence. Well, the term Islamic NATO is not official. Analysts use it to explain how the alliance works. Like NATO, the idea is based on collective defense. One attack, shared response. But unlike NATO, this grouping is centered around Muslim-majority countries and regional interests in South Asia, West Asia, and Africa.
Now, Turkey is taking its air of power far beyond its borders, and this time the destination is the Horn of Africa. In a move that signals both strategy and show of force, Ankara has deployed American-made F-16 Viper fighter jets to Somalia. And the deployment highlights Turkey's growing military footprint in key conflict-adjacent regions and underlines how its Air Force, built for decades around U.S.-made warplanes, is now becoming an expeditionary tool of power projection.
USA is secretly sending weapons to Ethiopia via Antichrist Turkey to save the fascist Oromo Islamic regime. A Turkish Air Force A-400M Atlas military transport aircraft recently flew from Turkey to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The aircraft, with registration number 15-0051 and call sign TUAF 757, departed from Kayseri, Turkey, and landed in Addis Ababa. This flight was observed and reported by various sources, including social media accounts. The A-400M is a military transport aircraft known for its capabilities in tactical and strategic airlift, including the ability to operate from shorter, unpaved airstrips. The aircraft was carrying heavy weapons that Turkey normally supplies to Ethiopia and other African countries. Turkey has supplied a range of military hardware, especially drones and related munitions, to Ethiopia's fascist Oromo Islamic regime since 2021 under official agreements. Since the beginning of the genocidal jihad in the northern Ethiopian regions of Tigray, Amhara and Afar in November 2020 till today, up to 2 million Orthodox Christians were brutally massacred. 200,000 Orthodox Christian women, children and nuns were raped and abused. Over 1 million Ethiopians were forced to migrate to other countries. 4.4 million internally displaced people severely impacted by conflict, hostilities and climate shocks. Over 1 million female Ethiopian slaves sold to Arab countries. 20 million Ethiopian forced to experience food insecurity by the fascist Islamo-Protestant Oromo Army of the Prosperity Gospel heretic Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his UN, Arab, Israeli, Turkish, Iranian, European, American, Russian, Ukrainian, African allies. A CIA deception operation is now underway in Ethiopia. On November 4, 2020, when the whole Luciferian world led by the Edomite West and Ishmaelite East started a genocidal war against the followers of the Orthodox Christian faith in northern Ethiopia. Here began the campaign in search of the biblical Ark of the Covenant. The war that started on November 4, 2020 was an opportunistic conflict started to coincide with the U.S. elections. This war sealed the fate of President Trump. He lost the manipulated U.S. election. Obama plus Biden stole the election. A covert CIA operation involving the very same traitors who waged the genocidal war against Ethiopian Christians, that is, the fascist Gala-Oromo Islamic regime plus Eritrea plus Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, plus Ethiopian Citizens for Social Justice, EZMA, and National Movement of Amhara, NAMA, plus Somalia plus Sudan plus Djibouti is now underway in Ethiopia. All the Hagarites/Ishmaelites, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, the Emirates, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, Algeria and Israel. After the flesh, the Hagarites/Ishmaelites with the identity and nature of the flesh, USA, Europe, Russia, Ukraine, China have marched on Axiomite Ethiopia in search of the Ark of the Covenant or Zion. And in the coming weeks and months they are preparing to march once again. The current tragic war in the Middle East is another dishonest, sophistic deflection from the ongoing ethnic cleansing and genocide in Armenia and Ethiopia. Armenia and Ethiopia are the two most ancient Christian nations of the planet. As Congressman Brad Sherman rightfully put it, much of the world barely noticed the war that tore Ethiopia apart between 2020 and 2022, causing innumerable atrocities and millions of deaths of ancient Orthodox Christians, the guardians of the Ark of the Covenant. It featured rampages of murder and rape against civilians even deadlier than those Hamas perpetrated on October 7th. It saw the bombing of cities, churches, monasteries, schools, hospitals, water infrastructure, flour mills, and the deliberate starving of civilians. Nobody is talking about this huge, probably world history-changing tragic event, because the CIA managed to keep that almost a secret because it controls the Ethiopian elites. The CIA infiltrated nearly every level of the Ethiopian politics. The Ethiopian plus Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church, everywhere, from Tigray, Eritrea, Amhara to the rest of Ethiopia, 2 are infiltrated by CIA/MI5/ASIS agents. The churches are now split on ethnic lines, and it is only for a skilled manipulator of which the FSB and CIA are masters of doing this to further divide and break down the churches into soulless shells of ethno-nationalism more than what they already are. CIA is the biggest political player in Ethiopia since it was established at the end of the Second World War, and has one of its worst records in the country. In the last decades, the CIA worked hard to control the narrative in Ethiopia on socio-political, economical, even on religious matters. It bought many of the elites. Even former CIA directors and agents are openly admitting these crimes. A covert CIA operation is now underway in Ethiopia. It started massively after the CIA brought traitor and Arab agent genocidal Abiy Ahmed and his Oromo Muslim supporters to power between 2012-2018, after PM Meles Zenawi was murdered. The ethnic Gala-Oromo Abiy Ahmed is not only a traitor and an anti-Ethiopian zealot, but also a cruel demon, a pathological liar and a crypto-Muslim, a secret adherent to Islam. The goal of the covert CIA operation is to destroy Ethiopia, which both the Edomites and Ishmaelites view as a threat. There is no doubt that genocidal Abiy Ahmed works for Ethiopia's traditional Edomite and Ishmaelite enemies. Be warned, some of the greatest Masonic, occult and deeply satanic deception operations are underway now in Ethiopia. The Edomites and Ishmaelites use genocidal Abiy Ahmed to destroy Ethiopia, its ancient Christian people and their Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Evil Ahmed must be immediately removed. If Ahmed is removed from Ethiopia, UAE, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and CIA will be removed from Ethiopia. The union of Ishmael and Esau that is shaking the world continues. People of the flesh are united in persecuting those of the spirit.
Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. On this program, I want to talk about where the Antichrist comes from, because I believe the Bible states very clearly that he will come from the city of Istanbul, Turkey.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan was born on February 26, 1954 in Istanbul, to a poor family of a Coast Guard worker. In 1994, Erdogan was elected mayor of Istanbul. Recep Tayyip Erdogan quickly gained political points due to his proletarian origin and adherence to Islamic values. His zeal on the religious side, however, displeased secular Turks, including those in power during those years. It got to the point that in 1998, while still mayor, Erdogan received a criminal record and even went to prison for publicly reciting a poem with the lines, "Mosques are our barracks, domes are our helmets, minarets are our bayonets, our soldiers are full of faith." Erdogan had to resign as mayor because of criminal charges. A popular version in Turkey is that Erdogan's ancestors came from Ajara, a region in Georgia. It was also confirmed by the head of state himself during an official visit to Georgia in 2004. "I am also Georgian. Our family moved from Batumi to Rize," Recep Tayyip admitted. Historians claim that there were no Turks among Erdogan's ancestors. Georgians were present among the head of state's ancestors, and Laz blood flows in him. For those who do not know, the Laz is a sub-ethnic group of the Georgian people. Their mother tongue is related to Mingrelian and is part of the Georgian language family. The Laz lived in what is now Turkey, even before the Seljuks and Ottomans arrived. The ancient Greeks called the country of the Laz, Mingrels, Svans, and other Western Georgians Colchis. That is where the Argonauts went on their ship in search of the Golden Fleece. In the subsequent era, the Laz managed to preserve their national identity, Christian faith, language, and culture in a hostile environment for a long time. Erdogan did not hide this and told the public about his roots in the summer of 2004 during his visit to Batumi, and also confirmed several times in his speeches that he is a Laz, although he believes that nationality does not matter to him. The main thing is that he is a Muslim. Erdogan actually recognizes that the Turkish nation was largely formed artificially under the influence of former Ottoman subjects, and, therefore, it cannot exist as a living organism without support. There are Crimean Tatar, Circassian, Georgian, Jewish, Balkarian, Slavic, Armenian, Chechen, Greek, and other non-Turkish blood in millions of Turks. However, they do not like to talk about it in Turkey and constantly remind about belonging to the Turkish nation.
Well, hello everyone, this is Al-Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of this fascinating video series on biblical prophecy and also the Middle East and current geopolitical affairs. Our guest speaker and expert, I would argue, is Joel Richardson, and for the last at least couple of episodes, he's been giving us a quick, brief background about what's going on and how does that tie into biblical prophecies. Last time we talked about also Ezekiel 38 and 39. Today we're going to start taking a journey through Daniel 11 and specifically focusing on the King of the North. With that in mind, Joel, welcome back, brother, and I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
It's good to be back with you. Yeah, so in last session, we were talking about the fact that Ezekiel 38 and 39, this incredibly important, towering prophecy in the Old Testament about the last days, that it zeroes in on Turkey. It actually prophesies a Turkish-led regional coalition or alliance or a revived empire that will lead an invasion of Israel in the last days. And the leader of this invasion is called Gog. I would argue that Gog is simply another name for the Antichrist. Interestingly enough, just sort of as a side point of interest, a lot of people, they look at Ezekiel 38, 39, which has this, Gog from the land of Magog, and he's invading Israel. And they think it's a different end time bad guy, different than the Antichrist. But what's interesting is if you actually go back to Numbers chapter 24, you have the prophecy of Balaam. Balaam, he's talking about the Messiah. He's talking about Jesus. He makes reference to the seed of Israel and the king of Israel. And then he says, he will be exalted above. Now, most of our English translations will all say Agag. So the seed and the king of Israel, i.e. Jesus, will be exalted above Agag. Well, Agag was the king of the Amalekites in the Old Testament. He was defeated by Saul, King Saul. And you go, so what does that have to do with the Messiah and so forth? But what's interesting is all of our English translations, they are derived from the Masoretic Hebrew family of texts. The Masoretic texts are actually medieval. Okay, so you're talking like 1000 AD. When we look at the earliest Hebrew manuscripts and some of the earliest Greek translations, such as the Septuagint or the Dead Sea Scrolls, they don't have Agag. They all have Gog. So there's a textual variant there that apparently the Masoretic texts get wrong. And so the point is this: in this very early ancient prophecy, one of the earliest messianic prophecies in the Bible, it says that basically Jesus, the seed and the king of Israel, will be exalted above Gog. And the reason this is important is because this is the first time in the Bible that it actually names basically Jesus's final, human enemy, if you will, the Antichrist. And it calls him Gog. So this is very important because, as I said, a lot of people think Ezekiel's talking about somebody else. They really overcomplicate the story. It's a much simpler story. Ezekiel is simply telling the same story that all of the other biblical prophets are telling. It's the same basic story. In the last days, a massive coalition of nations will reform. These are nations that surround Israel. They're Israel's neighbors throughout the Middle East, North Africa. They'll form an alliance or a coalition, invade the land of Israel. They'll be very successful for a period, but ultimately the seed and the king of Israel, Jesus, returns, defeats his enemies, defeats the enemies of Israel, saves the righteous, and reestablishes his throne on Mount Zion. Ezekiel's telling the same story. They all come at it from different angles and perspectives, but they're all telling the same basic story. Okay, so with that said, another looming, incredibly important prophecy in the Old Testament is Daniel chapter 11. And it goes hand in hand with Ezekiel 38, which again speaks of this massive army or coalition of nations led by Turkey, or from the region of Turkey. I always say Turkey, but you could say Turkey, Syria, or northern Iraq, that general area. Well, likewise, Daniel 11 Daniel 11 is focusing in on the historical period of time after Alexander the Great died. After Alexander the Great died, his empire was broken up among various successors, or diadochi they're called. And these dynasties eventually came to be really dominated by two dynasties. There were several of them, but eventually there were two strong dynasties. One was called the Seleucid dynasty, and that again was the region of Turkey, Syria, northern Iraq. Then you had the Ptolemaic dynasty, and that was basically Egypt, Libya, and extending down towards Sudan. Okay, so these are called, in Daniel 11, they're called the King of the North, that's the Seleucid dynasty, and the King of the South, that's the Ptolemaic dynasty. Well, the King of the North in Daniel 11 is the Antichrist. Historically, it was Antiochus Epiphanes, who is the Bible's greatest type or picture of the Antichrist. He's the greatest prophetic foreshadow of the Antichrist, and he's called the King of the North. So the Antichrist is called Gog. He's also called the King of the North. In both prophecies, he's from the region of Turkey or Syria or northern Iraq. As we've discussed in previous sessions, for that reason, I've been saying for 20 years, watch Turkey, watch this part of the world. Well, we've just seen the takeover of Syria, a tectonic shift, geopolitical tectonic shift by the Sunnis, by Jalani, by these groups that are sort of former offshoots of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and they have been supported ideologically by Turkey. So this is a massive loss of Syria by Iran and Russia, and it's a tremendous victory for Turkey. So with the takeover of Syria, we now essentially, for all intents and purposes, Syria used to be an appendage or an extension, a proxy of Iran. Now it's basically a proxy or an appendage or a tentacle of Turkey. And so you could say that Turkey now has borders with Israel, with Lebanon, with Jordan. Turkey has expanded its borders. It's not officially Turkey, but for all intents and purposes, the takeover of Syria is a Turkish victory. And so in that sense, we can see that the picture of the region that the Bible describes is exactly what we see coming into focus on the world scene right now. So these events of recent weeks unfolding in the Middle East in so many ways, for anyone who's paying attention to biblical prophecy, they are absolutely confirming the prophetic nature and the reliability of the prophetic scriptures.
Yeah, it's fascinating. When that happened, by the way, I thought about you immediately. I'm like, man, Joel is right on the money here when it came to that, because no one is talking about Turkey. That's the thing. Like you said, they're always gravitating towards other interpretations, or like I said, Russia is always at the center of all of that, but Russia was nowhere to be found. This would have been a golden opportunity actually for Russia to come and fill the gap, but obviously that didn't happen. Just one last question, brother, before we wrap this at least episode up. Obviously, the Syrian people can thank Israel for what happened, because it was Israel that kind of liberated them. But is there anything in these prophecies where indicate that the Jews themselves will be the progenitors of this movement against him? Actually, they will start, spearhead it, but it will come back against him. I'm just curious. That's all.
Interestingly, well, obviously Israel is going to fight against this entity. Initially, Daniel talks about him coming as a man of peace, a fake man of peace, which is exactly what Giuliani is doing. He's saying, oh, we're going to take care of minorities and all these things. I found it really fascinating, Al-Fadi, that several weeks ago, when Netanyahu spoke at the UN, he actually held up two pictures. And on one picture, it said the blessing. On the other picture, it said the curse. And both pictures were maps. They were maps of the Middle East. And on the picture that it said the curse, it literally had Iran, it had Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and it was basically the Iranian axis, if you will. It did not include Turkey, although now it should. And then on the one that said the blessing, it talked about Saudi Arabia and all of the nations of the Abrahamic Accords. he was basically holding up a picture of Daniel 11, the king of the north and the king of the south. And so it's amazing that that sort of, again, general picture that Daniel paints, it's literally the Prime Minister of Israel at the UN was holding up a map, and it could have just said Daniel 11 on it. So there's no question that Israel will initially probably see this as a good thing that they've defeated Iran, and pretty quickly they'll wake up and realize they have another enemy to their north, and that Turkey, for all intents and purposes, is the new Iran. We've seen a new Islamic revolution, not in Iran as took place in 1979, but over the past 10, 15 years in Turkey. We've seen a bit more of a subtle Islamic revolution, and we've seen one of the West's greatest allies emerge as a dark horse, if you will, and as a tremendous threat, dark clouds hanging over the future of the Middle East.